Welcome to episode 12 of the MDF mid-season team reviews. For this one, we are looking at CoachBQ. Now, this one's going to be a little different than some of the others, just because, from day one, the tank was on for Coach. Coming off an 11 and 17 2022 season, it was clear Coach had decided to tear it down and build a new empire. And as per plan, we've got an 0 and 16 record, all league record 10 and 94, so an implied record 1.5 to 14.5. Um, and as one might expect at 0 and 16, we are 0 and 8 against the median. Best finish any week has been ninth. That was back in week 2, but average weekly finish just better than 13th. So really scraping the bottom, and I mean that's by design. Points for 556. Points against abnormally high at 957. Highest points against of any team. So that explains the 0 and 16 because, most times a team will stumble into a win or two, but opponents have been, on average, putting up the absolute most against Coach this year. Max points for 771 is the second lowest in the league with a realized points of 72%. Um, Record, we don't really care for, but fourth hardest schedule by combined record of opponents thus far. Gets a lot easier down the stretch as the fourth easiest, but that's not where we're focused with this squad. Uh, it's it's almost comical the amount of points Coach has managed to stumble into at the quarterback position throughout the season. It's been a pretty clear point of emphasis to leverage the quarterback value into assets that can be utilized to rebuild this team in the future. And every time Coach trades one, we get another one popping up. So, taking a little walk down memory lane, we saw Stafford traded away for Minshew in a second. That Minshew pickup proves to be valuable later, outside of the detriment of max points for being boosted. Cousins and Pacheco traded for a first and a second. Goff, Judy, Komet going out for Hollywood Brown, a first, second, and third. So we've now traded 3 quarterbacks, brought one backup quarterback back in, but added 2 firsts, 3 seconds, and a third, as well as Hollywood Brown. So definitely a nice haul of picks and a nice young, talented wide receiver. Later, that Minshew pickup after A. Rich's injury proves to be a starter. Minshew traded out for McBride, which short-term returns looks like a good pickup given how McBride played most recently here. We'll see in the long term whether that plays out well. And then even since then, now Will Levis has cropped up on the taxi squad to contribute points for the quarterback slot against Max PF. Um, Despite playing this game of trying to diminish and eliminate the quarterback scoring, it's going to be difficult for Coach to continue that with Will Levis. There's a lot of value in terms of having a young high potential quarterback, especially stashed away on the taxi squad and protected from poach. So it's and I mean it's nice to have that as a building block towards a potential future competitive team because ultimately the whole point of any rebuild is to be competitive. And if you've already got Levis and if he proves to be an effective starter, that's one piece that doesn't need to be replaced going into next year. Then you take those draft picks, you add in another quarterback or use poach or trade, whatever the case, add in a second one, add this to a core of wide receivers, and you're cooking. We've got a chance to be competitive as early as 2024. This is a squad that currently sitting at second lowest in max PF and owning their own picks has a projected pick at 102. This can pretty easily move to 101 down the stretch here. And unlikely to drop beyond that, though. The gap between the second least max points for and the third least is growing steadily each week, and it is already decently large. Um, Add to that the picks that are currently in the coffer from other squads, and this squad's currently projected for 5 top 19 picks. Whether or not those picks are made or used in trade to further flesh out this roster for the 2024 season remains to be seen, but that is a lot of liquid value, assets that only appreciate in value leading up to the draft and can't get hurt, can't lower value as we move through this season. So it's a good way to go about your rebuild, just getting as much of your value and assets converted into picks. Looking at the top dynasty assets, you'll notice a trend of wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. It's the new hotness as far as building out your roster. Running backs are old hat. Quarterbacks are great, but they are a lot easier to trade and bring in return, as we've seen with the trades that coach has pulled off thus far. And tight ends are just unicorns. I mean, the number of tight ends that actually are reliable building assets can be counted on one hand, and you may not even need all those fingers. So we've got Marquise Brown, Jacoby Myers, Deontay Johnson, Marvin Mims as far as wide receivers go, and now Will Levis has snuck his way in there. It's a nice core. It does lack studs. And I mean, that the poach as well as the draft picks and everything that's to come over the next, say, 8 months leading into, or 10 months leading into the 2024 season, there's going to be plenty of opportunity to bring in a stud to really make this wide receiver room pop. Um, all these guys can be reliable wide receiver twos and flex position guys, but in order to truly be competitive, and you'll see this with a lot of the top competitive teams, you need yourself a Tyreek Hill, an AJ Brown, a Jamar Chase, like someone who consistently can offer a high floor while also having a weak winning ceiling. And though Hollywood Brown, Jacoby Myers, Deontay Johnson are all solid and consistent contributors, high target earners, rarely are any of those going to offer you that weak winning potential at any real point. As for kind of the other positions, there's not a lot there. If we look at season in review, at least for like contributors thus far this year, Jacoby Myers, Marquise Brown, Jerome Ford, Will Levis, Trey McBride, Deontay Johnson, Zach Ertz, and then we kind of get into the weeds, Kylan Granson, Robert Woods, Jason Brownlee. Jerome Ford's the interesting one. Hidden away on taxis, so there's that value to him. Can't be poached. Showing pretty well out in Cleveland since Nick Chubb's injury, and that's where things get interesting. Nick Chubb, I mean, we are all aware at this point, Nick Chubb's out for the season. Really gruesome leg injury. The interesting part there is going into next year, should the Browns cut Nick Chubb, they can save 11.8 million against the cap. It'd be a cap hit of about 4 million. That's really significant at the running back position, especially if Nick Chubb, coming off a major leg injury, can't necessarily be trusted to be who he has been before. I mean, it's tough for a team to go into a season with a near $16 million cap hit at a running back position unless you've got someone that you're confident is an absolute stud. So if Jerome Ford can show out for the rest of the year, there's a decent chance that Nick Chubb is let go in the offseason or at least given an opportunity to sign elsewhere. And Jerome Ford goes into 2024 as the starter. Now, could Cleveland bring in someone else? Could they draft one? Absolutely. I mean, I don't think many teams in the NFL are turning over the backfield to one player outside of extremely rare circumstances such as CMC, Derrick Henry, and again, this is pre-2023 Derrick Henry. He's been sharing this year. Um, Josh Jacobs last year. Like it's in any one year, you've got three, maybe four true bell cows anymore. So no, Jerome Ford's not going to be a bell cow, but he could be the lead guy. He could be the 60% or 65% in a timeshare. And I mean, that's a super valuable asset, especially in a league that only requires you start one running back. So Will Levis's emergence, Jerome Ford's emergence, and this core of solid wide receivers is a nice place to start. Add into that 5 top 19 picks, 8 draft picks overall. And there's definitely hope that this team's going to be at least interesting and exciting for the 2024 season. They may not necessarily be a contender. They might be a fringe playoff team, but at the very least, it's looking good to go in the right direction. A top 2 poach pick is always valuable. Past year it was Nick Chubb and Matthew Stafford. Kamara was number 3. Montgomery was number 4. Like, good players are available at the top of the poach. Add that to all these other assets that we've discussed, and if Will Levis is a real deal, like that's probably the biggest wild card here. If Will Levis is a top 18 quarterback, a top 20 quarterback, like he doesn't even have to be a stud, just competent enough to be a high-end QB2 in this league or a low-end QB1, and you've all of a sudden you've saved yourself basically a season worth of rebuilding or a large amount of assets to bring in that quarterback. So yeah, coach, the tank is on. The tank's in full force. It's going well as per the goals that have been set forth, and the off season is when this team's season really begins. So if Devil could hold off winning and just let someone else take it home, I'm sure coach would be really appreciative. Till next time, I'm out.